In today's episode, I have the pleasure of talking science communication with former U.S. Senate and House of Representatives Chief of Staff and President of Bayer Strategic Consulting, Mark Bayer. During our conversation, Mark and I talked about best practices when communicating science to non-academic audiences, but we also talked about the interface between science and policy and the role researchers and scholars can play in this sphere.
If you have interest in getting involved in policy, do it. Don't put it off, and don't think that you need to do something out of the gate that's so monumental and time-consuming. It can be as easy as following your member of Congress, your state representative, on Twitter and seeing what she's doing, and when she does something that you agree with, retweeting it. You can do that from your couch if you want to. You can do that anywhere. And that's getting involved at an early level, right? You can do that. And when somebody retweets it or likes it or then you're going to be like, hey, it feels kind of good. I just got a little dopamine hit there. I feel kind of, I'm getting involved in policy. And you are to an extent. You're dipping your toe in and testing it. And so I would just say, don't put it off and don't think that the barrier to entry is so high, because it really isn't. And we all need your voice to be a part of the policy-making discussion.
Welcome to Papa PhD with David Mendez, the podcast where we explore careers and life after grad school with guests who have walked the road less traveled and have unique stories to tell about how they made their place in a world of constantly evolving rules. Get ready to go off the beaten path and hop on for an exciting new episode of Papa PhD.
Welcome to this week's episode of Papa PhD. Today I have with me Mark Bayer. Mark is an international keynote speaker, coach, and course instructor, helping scientists and engineers get funding, gain influence, and build relationships with their most important stakeholders. Former Chief of Staff in the U.S. Senate and House of Representatives, Mark designs and delivers interactive talks and true-to-life training that empower listeners with the same proven powerful tools he used to effectively communicate and navigate in the U.S. Congress. Mark's work has appeared in Science and the New Yorker magazine, and he has been featured in IEEE-USA's Lesson on Leadership column. A guest lecturer in the Science Policy Bootcamp course at Cornell University's School of Engineering, Mark also hosts the weekly podcast When Science Speaks, which explores communication, science policy, and career issues. Mark is a magna cum laude graduate of Cornell University and earned his master in public policy at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Welcome to Papa PhD, Mark.
Thank you so much, David. It's fantastic to be here with you.
Well, I'm super happy to have you here, and I think just the bio points that I just covered are reason enough for me to be over the moon happy to have you on the show, and I'm super happy because we're in a situation, and right now we're still in the living the COVID pandemic, and this question of policy, this question of science communication, and this question of having a healthy interface between scientists and the population at large is so important today. So I'm really happy to have you on the show today.
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here with you. I'm a fan of your show.
Well, thank you very much. And I think let's go to the first point, which is to present you to the audience, to the listeners, and I'm just going to let you talk a little bit more about who you are, how that journey that I kind of alluded to in the intro, how it happened for you, and how you came to this position today of helping scientists who maybe want to get implicated in science policy, who want to communicate their science to a wider audience. How you got to this position, and then share a little bit about the experience you've had interacting with scientists throughout the years. And maybe we can even talk about the situation today, because it's a very particular one in that aspect.
Absolutely. I'm glad to do it. And also just note that rambling is an occupational hazard of people who are in politics. So feel free to interrupt, to stop, whatever, if this starts to be too long and windy. But
All right, we'll do.
yeah, I guess I'll just say off the bat that as a non-scientist, because my last science course was AP Bio in high school, which I actually enjoyed very much, but I love working with scientists because I really also feel a kinship, given that, as a political person, I always wanted to take on the big challenges, big problems out there in society, and to try to work with others to solve them. And in many ways, I feel that's what scientists do. They look out, they're out there on the frontier. They're trying to figure out really tough problems, and be really dedicated, and they're motivated by lots of different factors. But I think often it's just the motivation to want to do good and make a positive impact. And that was really my job description when I worked on Capitol Hill. And so, I spent, as you noted in the intro, a long time, about 20 years total, working on Capitol Hill, and two different tours, wedged in between a startup and working for PricewaterhouseCoopers on the consulting side, starting a nonprofit. I had the honor of being called back and going back to the Hill after about a 6-year time hiatus, I guess you would call it. And then, felt really, fortunate to be on the front lines of working on some of these biggest issues at the time: Obamacare, Homeland Security. And I came back to the Hill right after 9/11. I got the call from my old office.
Okay.
And went back, to the Hill at that point. Along the way, I felt like, number one, even though I'm not a scientist, we always had scientists that we work closely with, experts, PhDs, and so forth, many in our own office, because we always had IIAS Science and Technology Policy Fellows. And we took their expertise very seriously. It's funny because they never worked on the subject matter that they really were a subject matter expert in, that their PhD or postdoc was in, but they applied a way of thinking, a rigor, a system, a thoroughness that was so important and that we relied on a lot. So I worked very closely with scientists throughout my 20 years on Capitol Hill. And then when I left, I kind of felt like I had been chief of staff on the House side, House of Representatives, done the same, been chief of staff on the Senate side, worked part of some big campaigns. It was time for a new chapter. And around that same time, when the election in the United States was happening, all of us saw science, evidence, data really being marginalized as part of the policymaking process. It was ideology, not epidemiology, and I said was for the situation with COVID. And that really troubled me. But it wasn't just about COVID. It was all of these major issues that have an impact on us as a human race, whether it was clean air, clean water, just the environment more generally, and the national treasures, the natural and national treasures that we all have, our national parks and so forth, right down the list, to climate change, which is, of course, the biggest existential threat. I always say, like, COVID is up and climate change is on deck, because we know that is looming, and we need our best scientists, we need our best minds to be working on these major, there really aren't any bigger issues than these. They're existential. So that concerned me, that the merits and the data weren't being followed. And, this competing narrative that was based on lies was out there and being embraced by lots of people. So I kind of geeked out as a persuasion nerd that I am. Why do people make certain decisions? How can we influence people honestly and with integrity and authenticity and using actual evidence? How can we do that? There was a lot in the U.S. of, this is the 10,000s, this is the 20,000s lie. I think at the end it was, okay, we just hit 40,000 and now the administration's over. I wasn't really interested in compiling the lies as I was combating them and trying to figure out, are there ways that we can do this with honesty? And so I started writing about this issue. I did a talk at the IIAS conference in Austin in 2018 that was Fake News and Alternative Facts: How to Stand Up for Science When Data Aren't Enough. And I was really struck by, and I shouldn't have been really struck by, but I was surprised by just the volume of people who were in the room and wanted to talk about this. And then it sort of hit me that, facts and data and evidence are really the oxygen on which the entire scientific enterprise depends. So if you say that's no longer important, then you basically are just cutting off, the life support here for this thing that's so vital for all of us. And so I did some writing. A piece that talk at AAAS was included in Science Magazine, and some other writing. It was no pressure. The reporter showed up and he said, I'm going to write about this. This is right before I started talking. I said, that's okay. I had a lot of experience in this kind of situation when I worked in the Hill. And then the president of AAAS said, we've never done these sorts of talks before. And I said, I'm so glad I can, be a part of it. And this is the very first one that we've ever done.
Oh my!
Okay. I said, okay.
But you know what? I'm not surprised that the room was full, because it's an issue that has so many variables, and it's emotion, it's a sense of being in an in-group or out-group compared to other people. There's so many things enmeshed in this question of fake news and why people adhere to them, that I know in 2018 I can see how many people were interested on listening to you talk about it and maybe give them tools to combat it. It's not an easy thing to deal with.
Sure, and I think you put your finger on a major ingredient, which is emotion. And that is overlooked a lot of times by people who are in a position to refute these lies because they want to respond immediately with data and actual facts, which has actually turned out to be the wrong way, for the most part, the wrong way to do it, because people aren't really relying on facts exclusively when they come up with this stuff. It's motivated by other things. Sometimes it's anger, could be emotion, could be values, could be community norms, could be faith, all sorts of different things that really aren't on the same channel as facts are. So you start to broadcast on the facts channel, and they're only listening to the emotions channel, and you're gonna miss each other. It's gonna be a frustrating experience. And so the more I did that, the more I started working with universities. Actually, that conference led to a keynote at UNC Chapel Hill, because scientists, and I still feel this energy. Of course, March for Science, right, almost immediately after the former administration began, mobilize people, and I did work for them as well, and spoke at their conference. And the whole idea here, and the reason I do what I do, is I really do want to empower and equip scientists, engineers, technical people who have so much important knowledge, but help them translate that and communicate that to non-experts, to their most important stakeholders who are in a position to actually take that data, that knowledge, and get it into the public policy realm so all of us can benefit.
Yeah. Not to be touching something that can be divisive, but today this whole question of wear a mask, don't wear a mask, that's just one example. And be vaccinated or not. If you think about it in terms of data and of science, I think it's pretty clear what to do. But the thing is, like you were saying, a part of the population is not attuned to just what the science says, and there's so many other things that are weighing in on their decision to want or not to comply with these things, that it's true that for sure someone who comes from a space of science and numbers and logics might have a hard time having a discussion and convince people that that what they are saying and that the data they're presenting are bona fide reasons to follow these instructions. This totally makes sense. Now, you did these talks. You started working with universities, and today you offer this service to scientists who want to communicate their science to the wider public.
Exactly. Yeah, I have a workshop. Of course, these were all in person, although the online class was always an online class. But
Mm-hmm.
I have a workshop that I do that's usually a half day. It can, it's really about unleashing your power as a scientist, because even though we've been talking about emotion and the fact that scientists often live in the world of data, scientists also have a lot of underlying assets already
Mm-hmm.
that can be effective in the policy environment. They just need to be reoriented a little bit in this, new world, or this different world, I should say. And then I also offer an online course, which I started a couple of years ago, which is how to effectively communicate your science to any audience. And just a brief note about that, I actually am offering the latest round. I usually do it about once or twice a year. And the latest round is coming up on February 18th, as it turns out. And if anyone is interested in learning about the course and wanting to potentially sign up for the course, all they need to do is, if they have their phone, they can just text Science Speaks, which coincidentally happens to be close to my podcast name, Science Speaks, to 44222. And then they'll send their email. They'll get prompted. They'll send their email, and I'm happy to send out information about the course.
This is great. And just to be clear to the listeners, this is 1 week after the air date of the episode. So it's airing on the 11th of February, and and we're recording way before. But with the magic of podcasting, this is airing exactly 1 week before the beginning of the program. So perfect. And you know what? I will also share that information in the show notes of the episode.
Thanks, David. I appreciate it.
Well, now a question. You have had a lot of scientists from different domains doing your workshops, coming for you for some advice on these questions that you mentioned. And let's start maybe with science communication. Can you maybe share with me and with the listeners what you've found? Maybe a couple of main roadblocks or common roadblocks that scientists coming to you have, that you consistently have to deal with, or to teach them to work around?
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And I just want to say, high level, like these kinds of things, like distilling all this information that you have as a scientist and then translating it and communicating it to a non-expert in a way that's engaging and memorable, that's hard. That's not an easy task. And so I understand that. It's something that I have spent, 20 years doing. I think I would probably blow up a lab if I was asked to do an experiment. So I sort of turn the mirror on myself. But I want people to feel like this is a skill, though, that they can learn if they, practice it. They get instruction in it, and they continue to use it. They'll get better and better. And it started enjoying it a lot, which leads to the virtuous cycle of doing it more and getting even better and getting even more compliments. So a couple of things that just strike me, and I'll sort of give a couple of just maybe quick headlines that explain what I mean. And the first is you're really showing the trailer, not the movie. And so when you're describing your science, again, we're only talking about general audiences here, people who aren't in your specialty. There is an inclination that you want to sort of tell as much as you can and squeeze in as much detail and information as you can. The problem is that it ends up getting completely garbled in the mind of your listener. They get confused very easily. And so reorient that and think to yourself, I really just want to get them interested, give them some highlights, and then I can always fall back and give them more details, either following up or in writing, whatever it happens to be. But my focus, of course, is oral communication. So you just think, I'm going to just show them the trailer. I'm not going to tell them all of the plot twists back and forth of how I got to this and, what routes we took and what we thought of but wasn't correct and what I really just want to get them interested in seeing the movie, getting more details. So show the trailer, don't show the movie. And then sort of along those lines, you think, well, okay, that sounds great. Well, how do I do that? right? How do I actually do that? So
yeah, how do you choose? Because for a scientist, all those details can seem to be important, right?
Right.
But you need to have to be able to decide. Okay, there's a cutoff. This is going to stay below water, and then the tip of the iceberg I'm going to present is going to be this. How do you decide?
It's so true, because it's like I spent all this time like, okay, which one of your children is your favorite? Like,
exactly.
You know, like I've spent all this time working on this, and I'm so in the meat, you know, and I'm glad you're fired up. You're passionate about it. You definitely need those things, but it's not in this aspect of it. So I say, think about it this way. A lot of times what trips people up when they start to go off path here is process steps. First, we did this because, of course, we're talking about people who generally approach things in a logical progression. We tried this, then we tried that, then we tried the other thing. Oh, then we found out it didn't work. Or if we adjusted it slightly, it would. Look, think of yourself, so process steps. If you find yourself talking about different interim process steps that you took to get to some result, it can be an interim result, but some kind of, you know, more relatable result. If you find yourself talking about, you know, all the things that you did to get there, then you know that you're veering off path. It's sort of like, if you ever heard, like, you know, you might be a redneck if, you know, there's that Jeff Foxworthy comedy sketch. You know, you might be going too deep in the weeds if you're talking about all of these process steps. You don't want to do that. And so think about that if you're starting to do that, because also kind of envision yourself talking to a friend or an acquaintance that you just met, and you're walking along and you're talking about your work. Every time you say something that person doesn't understand, what they're thinking in their head is, what did he just say? What did she just say? I don't quite understand this. And they start to think about trying to decipher what you just said. Now, in the meantime, you're continuing to walk, right? You're still walking. You're like 5 paragraphs into something different, right? So that means that your friend there starts falling behind in the journey. You keep walking and keep talking. Maybe he or she figures out something and then catches up a little bit. But the more you do that, the more that person falls behind the conversation until finally they just give up. They're just so far behind. Maybe they'll check in. You know, that's usually when they're reaching for their phone. They're like, okay, I surrender. You know, this is like too much in the weeds, too complicated. I can't relate to it. I don't have anything to latch on to in my own non-scientific outside the lab world to really understand what you're saying. So if you think about that, you know, you want to keep that person walking side by side with you, continually bringing them along in your conversation. And ways to do that, like you said, you know, show the trailer, not the movie, and then use examples and that are real world examples. So, you know, it's kind of like, you know, what we're trying to figure out. It's sort of like insert thing that the person's going to understand, right? You know, it's it's like when you're climbing a mountain and you're looking for the different, like I had this, one of the students in the course come up with some great, you know, examples. A neuroscientist in this last go around from UChicago was talking about something that was very complicated. She basically, you know, how does the brain like register? What is the brain doing when it sees, say, a dog? Like what's happening, like with these zeros and ones, right, in the brain, these electric, you know, bursts, you know, what are the neurons doing? I mean, that's a very complicated thing, particularly when she said, because once you understand what it might be doing when it sees a dog, guess what? It's doing something different when it sees a wet dog. When it sees a wet dog, it's like, oh, don't climb on me. I mean, I can still see her excitement. But when it sees the dog, just walk up to it. It's, oh, a different feeling. Your brain's doing something different. So she used some just great analogies and metaphors to talk about that. And it kind of very quickly made it comprehensible to non-experts, people like me who don't have any experience in there. So think about what's it like. Think about what is this like that my listener can understand from his or her real world.
Makes me think of the CRISPR-Cas9 Nobel Prize, and there was one term that kind of bubbled up, and I think it kind of represents what you just said, which is you just, you know, I heard journalists saying, well, they're molecular scissors that cut DNA in specific sites and then we're able to paste another part of DNA in there. And that's this expression, molecular scissors. When I listened, I was like, okay, this is genius, because it encapsulates so much. in so little and in something so relatable.
Right. And just on that, David, I'll just quickly tell you, because sometimes what I get as pushback when I say use something like, it's like, yeah, but it's not exactly the same thing as what I'm talking about. And I said, I know it's not the exact same thing you're talking about, because if it were the exact same thing you're talking about, it would be the thing. But guess what? The person doesn't understand the thing. So you have to give them something that's similar. Like, when you say molecular scissors, well, it's not, because there's no hinge, and that's fine. And you can get to those really nitty-gritty details, maybe to a subset of your listeners if you have to, but they're never going to want to learn about your research if they're not immediately attracted to and interested in, drawn to what you're saying. And you can only do that by giving them things that are relatable to what they do, where you're giving them more results and not process steps, interim steps, and you're making it relevant, to their everyday.
It totally makes sense. So right now I see two there's like two steps that you've mentioned. The first one is you have a bunch of children, but you're gonna only be able to talk about 2 or 3 of them. that's the first one, or else you're gonna lose the person. And the other way to lose the person, it's kind of the second step, is if you turn on your microscope and you go into very, very small detail, and you need to widen the angle and find the similes and metaphors that will talk to the person.
Right. There's one more thing I'll add that's a little different that people don't always think about, which is this doesn't have to be, and really shouldn't be, a monologue. Like, if our goal here is to keep our listener engaged, active, following the conversation, ask questions. Ask them some questions along the way. You can start with a question. Who here has ever heard of a molecular scissors? Or what do you think of, or, anything along those lines immediately, like right away, because as folks who study neuroscience and other related fields probably know, the principle, and something I talk about also in a course, the principle of primacy and recency is very important. So the first thing that I say and the last thing I say, you're really going to zoom in on. So I need to get you right away interested in what I have to say. And then I can give you a little bit of backstory, make it relatable, things like that. And then at the end, I'm sort of going to give you a reprise of the beginning, refer back to it in some way, maybe slightly differently, but still the same sort of idea. So the person who leaves, is leaving, really it will stay with that person. The primacy and recency. Sometimes you may have heard of the idea in journalism, they say, don't bury the lead. They mean is, you have a great sentence here about what this whole thing is about, why it matters, what some implications are for the future, but guess what? It's on page 2. The reader's never going to get to page 2. They need to get this right away. So let's move that up. And just the last thing on that point I'll say is, it's not figuring that out immediately. It's almost impossible when you just go run. You do your run through. You do your run through, sort of your rough draft first version. You have to get it all out and then go back and look at it and see, okay, where is that really attention grabber? What do I want to include in my trailer? You can't do that straight off the bat. It's very, very difficult.
It certainly feels like there's some neuroscience behind what you're talking about. The neuroscience of retention, of how to make someone retain information, and the way you're telling to structure things feels like, I'm sure that if we looked, and I don't know if it's something you've studied, you may have, that we could find some neuroscience basis, behind why this works the way it works.
Right. One way I think about it as a non-neuroscientist, non-scientist, is I want my listener to be thinking along with me. Almost co-creating with me. And that means that I say something. Sometimes I tell a story, particularly people who are interested in science policy. They want to get involved in policy making, so one way or another. And I tell the story about this Canadian gold mine. Actually, it is a gold mine that exists up in Canada, and I talk about how I walk through that story and I show a couple of slides about it, and then I'll have people come up to me and say, hey, how are you? And I say, have we met before? And I say, yeah, you're the Canadian gold mine guy, right? And it's just like, because that I gave them something that they can relate to, so they have to. They're processing that in a very specific, concrete way. And I think, again, as a total layperson, it probably is being retained. It's going in some file system somewhere in their own brain that they're calling up again when they see me, because I'm probably in that same file in a different folder. And so it's just like that's what they. So I want my listener to be thinking along with me, and they can only do that if they relate to what I'm saying, if they've experienced something like I'm talking about.
I love it. And one of the other ththings that I think you must be good at, given, because I'm trying to picture what you're saying, there's a pace, right? There needs to be a fairly, because you were talking of two people walking in a forest, and there's, when you're giving a talk, there's a pace that if you're too fast, you can lose people, or if you're too slow. But then the fact that you are calling back to the information at the beginning also kind of naturally puts a limit to how much information in one, you can provide in one go, let's say. So this all makes a lot of sense. Now, all of this that you've been saying makes me think of one thing, which is, we talk about science communication. We're talking about science communication, and just maybe to be clear, and maybe you can add a little bit. This applies not only to popularization, to scientists who want to share, their own results to the general public, but imagine in a startup, if you want to convince investors to put in more money or to invest in your project, I think what you just described is the same process that can be used in this setting, right?
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Before listening to Mark's insights on talking science in a corporate setting, I just wanted to thank you for being a listener of the show. My goal with these conversations is to provide you with at least one take-home message, one actionable item you can apply in your personal and professional development, and I believe you'll have more than one in this episode. I also want to bring you value by making improvements to the show. Recently, I've had my first listener check-in on Instagram, for example. Also, for you who are a new listener, I've just curated themed collections of episodes I call starter packs to allow you to catch up on all the conversations and easily find the ones that interest you. You can find them by visiting papaphd.com/start. And I have big plans for the podcast in 2021, like improving the accessibility of each interview by having someone prepare and upload clean transcripts, or being able to better thank guests for their generosity and time coming on the show, with a gift, for example. Bringing Papa PhD to you every week in the current format is a lot of hard work, so to help keep the project afloat, I've set up a new way for you to support the show, a Patreon. To be clear, you don't have to be a patron to listen to Papa PhD. It's free and it will always be. And you have my profound appreciation for tuning in each week and for talking about the show with your friends. But for you who want to help me maintain the quality of the show and potentially bring to life some of the cool ideas I have for it, you now have a simple way to do so. Just go to papaphd.com/Patreon and choose one of the tiers or create your own. Again, thank you for being a listener. Now, let's get back to the interview.
And I can give you a specific example, because I know, as you do, David, and also as someone, who has an interesting, meaningful career outside the lab, there are so many PhDs, mainly, I guess the majority of, I should say, who are doing these types of jobs that are not necessarily inside academia. And so an example of that, a real example, I had a student who was a really gifted chemist, PhD, and he was working in industry, and he had a meeting with upper management, and upper management wanted to know whether the company that they all work for should partner with another company that had a chemical process that was complementary similar but different than their current process that they own the IP for, the intellectual property for.
Mm-hmm.
And they asked him, as the chemist who is a leader of this department, should we partner with this company? And he told me this story, and he basically said, I spent all this time talking about the ins and outs of our chemistry, and the details of our chemistry, then of course the details of their chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And you can imagine, as these upper management, like, that's not what they either can understand or want to know about. But he was really having difficulty answering that specific question. So finally, and again, with good reason, this is not training that a lot of PhDs are receiving. Finally, he got around to the point of, look, their chemistry, while it might be a slight improvement over what we have, it is different enough that we would have to either hire new people to work on this, or we'd have to retrain people to work on this. And because it's only slightly better, it's not worth it. Okay. And so I think everybody in the room sort of exhaled. 30 minutes later, was thinking, like, we're not getting those 29 minutes back. And just felt like, that's all we wanted, right? Was that 1 minute. But when you're not used to exercising that muscle, and it takes practice, it does take a while to get it into, into fighting shape, so to speak, into being able to communicate it in that way. And he realized that, and he was frustrated, by that. So that's one of the things that an application sort of that you're talking about. You're talking to investors. They just have, what's my return on investment going to be? What are the risks? I don't want to know the ins and outs of the technology. I don't understand it. And it's not my role, really, to know the ins and outs of it. I just need to know, is it going to be profitable? Who's going to buy it? What are some of the risks out there? And so forth. So if I start going into sort of the details all about, which is my comfort zone, right? As the expert, I'm just going to lose people, and it's going to be frustrating. It's not going to be successful.
Yeah, it's funny. A recent guest on the show, Fabrice Marquet, he's in Monaco, and he has a PhD, but now he's in a startup incubation business. And he said, no, throw away the science. If you want me to work with you to grow a startup, and you're coming with details, I know you're not there yet with your product and with the idea. So I'm not sure I'm going to listen to you. Now, this kind of, for me, makes me think of the next step, because we talked about talking to the public, talking in a business investment or corporate setting, and then there's government. We talked about it. I talked about it in the intro, or in your intro, and I think it's kind of it's a next level, which is policy, and how to help, how scientists or people with a scientific background of different levels contribute or can contribute to help politicians make decisions that then end up affecting all of us as a population. And you've had experience in DC, like we mentioned, and this I know because we talked before that this is a point that interests you a lot. Can you talk a little bit about that, and maybe about experience you've had with people wanting to make that transition from science to policy?
Sure. And I, one of the things I want to do in my everyday job is to encourage and empower and equip scientists to get involved in policy for the reasons that we talked about earlier. And I'm obviously very happy that OSTP is going to be a cabinet level, position, and there's going to be a much heavier reliance on science in the service of public policy, because we really do need it desperately. I think a few things for anyone who is interested in getting involved in policy making. A couple of things just to keep in mind. One is, it does not have to be at the federal level. It could be federal in the U.S., could be working at the federal level in one of the executive branch agencies and departments, or in Congress, but it doesn't have to be. In fact, it can start in your own neighborhood. We, for example, in the county that I live in, there are always these policy issues that come up. Should we build a fourth high school? How are we going to handle, the runoff from this stream? And those are all policy issues, and they're all going to affect the community. And if you're just starting out, you might want to consider getting involved in those initiatives and those discussions. And the second point is, you do not have to have your PhD in water quality or your EDT in education. You don't have to have an your doctor of public health to talk about health issues. I think that sometimes people kind of, they self-select out and they take themselves out of discussions because they don't feel qualified. Now, this is usually because in the university world, actually, you do have to have those sorts of credentials, but we're not to really engage at some levels, but we're not in the university world at all. We're in this other world. And so getting to this point of the rigor of the analysis, understanding data, understanding the questions to ask. These are all really process, the systematic thinking. This is all training that is so relevant to these issues, these public policy issues, and that all PhDs, postdocs, they're receiving. And so you can really put those to use at the state and local level, and of course at the other levels of government. But just something to think about is, don't narrowly interpret your own expertise and say, well, I can't participate because I'm not an expert as defined in the university world, because you're not in the university world. So the minute you start asking about p-values, you can imagine the situation where, it's funny, you're around the table and you're talking about, say, chemical spill in this particular body of water in your community. And there are people from the county board, there are neighbors, and then, there are people from the chemical company down the road that's assuring everybody. Again, this is just a story that I'm just making up at the time, but I'm telling you a story so you can visualize. You can imagine that discussion around the table, and the person from the chemical company says, "Oh, don't worry, it's not a problem to public health." Well, regardless of what your experience is as a PhD, there are a million questions you could ask. Well, why do you come to that conclusion? What studies? And then ask. And then quickly, you're certainly the expert in the room for those people who are wondering the same kind of thing, but they don't have that kind of background and training to ask those questions. So you can decide, you can do that. See, oh, I really enjoyed that. Maybe I want to get involved at the state level, or maybe I want to apply for a fellowship. If you're in school, the AAAS Fellowship, Science and Technology Policy through science societies is really well known. A lot of states are doing this now, basically the same thing, but it's state legislatures, California, Massachusetts, New Jersey, Idaho, are doing this, and so they're at a very smaller scale. They're doing this as well. But even even things like, okay, well, I just read something and I want to email a letter to the editor, about some topic, about some policy topic. That's a good way for you also to see, did you enjoy that? Or I want to actually go to the office hours, for my member of Congress, because they all have local offices, and you can do that and see how you like to do that as well.
I love that. I would have not thought of any of these things you've just suggested. The only thing that I have seen is that some universities, some graduate schools have science policy clubs, or groups of people, or even people can get involved in university, in policy related to university. But it's really interesting that what you're saying, that this is a skill, and it's and you can see if you have a taste for it, but by doing it in different settings that are and at different levels, some closer to you, and then eventually some at a larger scale. Let's say it's really, really, really interesting.
Thank you. And because I want scientists and engineers and technical people who have this information, this really strong evidence-backed information, to get their voices heard. And you can certainly think about those avenues and decide whether you like to do it, and then decide how much time you want to spend on it. But one funny question that came out of one of the keynotes I did is I talked about getting involved in policy, and so during the Q&A, one of the PhDs raised his hand and said, I would only have an hour a week to do this. Like how much of an impact can I make? And I said, if you spent an hour a week writing to your member of Congress, maybe going to office hours once in a while, retweeting, posting, or something like that, you would set yourself up higher than 99% of the people in the congressional district.
I love it.
So you would be recognized. They would know that you were involved, and other people would know that you were involved. So don't overestimate how much time it takes to get involved.
It's funny. I think we're talking about this particular thing of getting involved in science policy, but this thing that you said in life, I think, stops us from doing so many things. This thing of, but I'm not as good as X, who am I looking at because they have a wonderful, I don't know, Twitter profile, or I don't like you mentioned before. I can't do this. I don't have the credentials or the studies, and I really, really love your approach, and I think it's an inspiration to try new things and allow yourself to, if you feel this interest and this curiosity, to go test the waters.
Thank you. And I'll just say one thing that relates to this, and I know it can be very difficult for people who are still in university because the demands on their time are just so tight, and it's hard to do things outside the lab, the library, for example.
This is true.
But in interviewing folks who have been able to get more involved, when I say folks, I mean primarily PhDs, postdocs, who've been able to get involved. One of the things that they have done is they have been able to carve out. Usually what they do is they find something their PI or their advisor is sort of interested in, and then they get that green light, and then they go ahead and maybe do, either maybe they just write an article about it, or they, in some cases, put together a little conference about it. But I think as a generalist that I am, and I know, of course, PhDs, you're super duper specialized, but as a generalist, what I find is the more you can, and it doesn't even have to be political, but the more you can get outside of your lab and experience different things, what I found is that can really help your science in the sense that the more little experiences you have in territory that's not your native habitat, say, the more you gain different perspectives. And I personally feel like that's when innovation happens, it's by taking seemingly disparate things and combining them in new ways. And that can inform your science as well, as you sort of get out there, that's sort of like, yeah, I remember I did this, and maybe we should look at it a little bit differently. This is sort of the argument for diverse teams and so forth. And you can do that in your own head by trying to think of yourself, okay, I know I have all these requirements and super specialized on these experiments that I need to get done, this quarter or this month, but are there little things that I can do that maybe seem unrelated? And you might be surprised that you get more aha moments in the lab than you normally would have.
This totally makes sense, just because kind of stimulate your brain to explore and to be in a novel space, and so this new terrain that you'll gain in terms of your mind space will probably have effects on what you were doing before. And another thing that I feel must be important, and you having been in DC for all that time and having that experience, and now also talking with all these people and helping them communicate their science, I'm sure that there's an aspect of, or that there's, what I was going to say is, I'm sure that the aspect of networking and of meeting different people that come from different spaces is also something that I imagine has this positive effect on you.
Yeah, for sure. And it does have kind of an angle to it when you talk about effective communication, in the sense that, I am always looking I'm curious by nature. I really do love hearing people's stories and their backgrounds and how they got to do what they're doing, and, things like that, their experiences. And I like that. When I teach communication, one of the things I say is look for connection points. Even before you decide, how am I going to present this? You're up in Canada. I have relatives there. Where do you live? Just ways of connecting on a human level that are authentic, honest, obviously, and accurate. And that can help sort of open up channels of communication that otherwise may have been more difficult if you had just launched right into whatever you wanted to say. It's funny, people say like small talk, like it's unimportant. Actually, it's there for a reason, because I think you sort of want to warm up, with your listeners a little bit before. It's one of the reasons why you ever hear politicians at a big rally, it's so great to be here with my friend so-and-so, that the crowd knows, and be back in XYZ town, which I haven't been in 4 years. All these little things. I actually heard a talk by one of Mrs. Obama's former speechwriters, First Lady, and she said that, he would always put that at the beginning of speeches, and now there's a reason for it. It's this connection that I'm talking about right before they communicate. Connect before you communicate. It's a mantra that I like to teach. And then the fact checkers at the White House would send back these emails saying, red flag on this, they've never met, and they're good friends, or, they know. It's like, okay, look, literally, you are correct, but you have to understand, right, more broadly speaking, why that is there, why it's important. And I'm sure they do have things in common, but nonetheless, this idea of networking sometimes can be anathema. It's like a dirty word, but it's funny because you say to scientists, don't you go to those lab happy hours?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, those are great. I was like, well, that's what I'm talking about too. Don't you like to stand around with a drink in your hand and chat with people? I love, well, really, that's what I want you to think about when it's networking. What do you like to do? Again, asking questions in the beginning to try to discover some common humanity, that we all have things in common.
I agree, and it's true that it can be seen as this kind of shifty or schmoozing, or a bit shady, but I can understand totally where you're coming from with this thing about authenticity. It is important, and then it flourishes into something else eventually.
And it's very true, and we as humans are social beings, right? And I had someone on my show a while ago, Alison Shapiro, who's great. And she talks about she's a public speaking expert, works with a lot of women executives. And, you look at polling, you can see that fear of public speaking is right under fear of snakes as what people are most scared of. So it's like snakes, public speaking. Now, dying in a plane crash is further down the list. So people are more afraid. So I said to Elsa, like, why are people so afraid? Why are people afraid to just engage with others whom they don't know? And what she said, she said, well, of course, there's no like definitive answer to that, but she had a really good one. And she said, think about way back in time when, humans were in tribes and everyone sort of was a nomad, and they were moving around the savannah, and it was a very perilous time to be alive. And, you were in your group. And if you got split off from that group, if you were ostracized, if you were exiled, if maybe you said something to offend, you did something that was viewed by the leader as so egregious that you were cast out from the group, well, that was fatal, right?
Yeah.
That was you weren't going to survive on your own out there. And so she said she thinks that there is some of that same hardwiring that is still firing in our brains that really makes us worried about putting ourselves out there, because there could be bad consequences. Of course, they're not going to, that doesn't include death generally, although in some totalitarian regimes it does, unfortunately. But for our conversation here, embarrassment and things like that are what people fear. But thinking about doing it authentically, as you mentioned, David, and trying to find commonalities that don't have to be monumental. We went to the same college, we traveled to the same place. I'm interested, we talked earlier, your family roots are in Portugal. My wife and I are thinking about traveling to Portugal. These are, as long as it's done authentically and honestly, and it's not done in a transactional way. I think sometimes people who operate kind of in the world primarily of just logic think, well, they have something that I want, I'm going to ask them for it, I'm going to get it, and then I'm going to either move on, or that's it. And I find that way of thinking, it's short-sighted, and it makes it more difficult for people to really want to help. Sometimes I talk about the lawnmower principle. You have a neighbor who you only really talk to when she wants to borrow your lawnmower, right? And it's kind of like, look, asking for a lawnmower is not a big deal. I'm not using it, right? I know she's going to return it. It's going to be in fine shape after she's done. So I don't have a negative feeling about that person, but I don't really have a strongly positive feeling about that person either, because I sort of on some level feel she's just using me for my and wouldn't it be nice if maybe, when she was, hey, I'm going to the supermarket, you need anything, like just reach out proactively once in a while. And that would totally change my perception. And maybe at some point I could say to her, hey, I just happened to see that, lawnmowers are on sale. You can get one really cheap, or someone's giving away a brand new lawnmower two blocks down. You might want to check it out. And that becomes more of a relationship rather than just a request.
I love the example. Yeah. And that's actually, I was kind of looking for that idea of the transactional versus an authentic relationship. And I think you just put the finger on it. Mark, reaching the end of the interview, and I just want to keep on talking because it's so pleasurable, but we're going to have to kind of close. And we talked about how to adapt your discourse and kind of choose what you're going to say, and maybe leave something behind the curtain when you're going to talk with the public. We've also talked about how this process of choosing and deciding what you're going to share, how we can apply in a corporate space. We've also talked, and I find this really interesting, of how you can step by step move towards a role in policy. And, maybe just to kind of finish, again, staying on this policy question, because I have a feeling that with all that's happening, with all this question of the pandemic, and of all the things that need to be done to fight it, that people with the scientific background may have more and more of a place, in the public arena, in this capacity of explaining things and bringing knowledge to community. Maybe if you have, I haven't asked this, or I haven't mentioned this, or that I was going to ask you this, but if you have some last few words for people who are listening and who do feel this urge, be it to combat fake news or to go into policy, but they feel a bit lost. You've already shared a lot of how to get there, but maybe if they feel this urge to do it quicker and to do it now, I don't know if you might have some advice for them. And then maybe just share where they can reach out to you, where they can find you, and you can maybe remind us of the name of your workshop that's coming up next week.
Sure, I would be glad to. And I would just say, if you have interest in getting involved in policy, do it. Don't put it off, and don't think that you need to do something out of the gate that's so monumental and time consuming. It can be as easy as following your member of Congress, your state representative, on Twitter and seeing what she's doing, and when she does something that you agree with, retweeting it. You can do that from your couch if you want to. You can do that anywhere. And that's getting involved at an early level, right? You can do that. And when somebody retweets it or likes it, or then you're going to be like, hey, it feels kind of good. I just got a little dopamine hit there. I feel kind of, I'm getting involved in policy. And you are to an extent. You're dipping your toe in and testing it. And so I would just say, don't put it off, and don't think that the barrier to entry is so high, because it really isn't. And we all need your voice to be a part of the policy making discussion, because when it's not, then decisions are made by alternate means and based on other, I would say, non-evidentiary, non-science backed reasons. And that's dangerous for everyone. that is dangerous for everyone. So scientists, I would just say, if you're out there listening, how do I do this? Yeah, something as easy as social media, something as easy as making an appointment you could make an appointment to talk to, your, say, district office. I'll just give you a specific example. Say you were really concerned about ulcerative colitis, and you're doing research related to the microbiome, which I know is very, very popular these days. And so you said, maybe your research has something to add. You could call up your local congressperson's office and say, can I speak with the staffer who handles healthcare? And I'm a constituent from so-and-so place. You need to establish yourself. Sort of, why should they listen to me with the deluge of information and people coming at that office? Well, they're going to listen to you when you lead with the fact that you're a constituent. And then you'd like to talk to the healthcare staffer. And one way or another, communicating with that person and saying, hey, I'm from XYZ town in the district or state, and I'm doing research on the microbiome, and I know that the member is on the health committee or is interested in healthcare, and always trying to tie it to the member's interest or why they should care. And then you can begin a back and forth. You could even say, I don't have any particular request, but I do have some resources, that might be helpful. Can I send you a one-pager, which is sort of the currency of Capitol Hill, anyone who's busy, to do that, and just of information. And then you start to build more of a relationship. And you might be surprised. You might get an email saying, hey, you know what? We're going to introduce the boss is going to introduce legislation on this topic. Would you take a look at this section of the bill and provide some feedback? And that's really great. That's how okay, now I'm, really inside and having specific input into national policy in this example.
I love it. It's so simple.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, we need you. We need more scientists and folks who are dedicated and have the rigor that you have involved in policy.
It's so funny because this week's episode, the episode that I published in the week that we're recording this, it's in French. It's with the person in France who's directing, so in the government, who's directing the largest nationwide science festival. And she said precisely that. She said, we're in the position that I am, we are 5 in the French government right now. And her kind of dream or wish is that in 2 years, 5 years, that they're 10 or 15, because she's like you just said, she feels that there's a need for people with scientific background to populate this interface between government and society, between science and society. So I just love that you just said it just like that.
Well, thanks for that, David. I appreciate it.
So where can people find you online? How can people reach out to you if they have questions or if they want to talk a little bit about your workshop?
Sure. Well, very easy. The first is you can just simply text Science Speaks to 44222. That's Science Speaks with an S at the end to 44222. You can also go to bearstrategic.com, and there is a connect with me button on the homepage and so forth. You can do that. It gives you an opportunity to say what you want to talk about, and a good number to reach you. And I'm always happy to talk to folks who have interests like those of your listeners. So that's probably the easiest 2 ways. You could certainly follow me on Twitter at bearstrategic as well if you do that. And I welcome LinkedIn requests to connect as well. So if you look up Mark Bayer, maybe 1 or 2 other people, but you'll recognize sort of what I do by the description, and I'd be happy to connect with you on LinkedIn as well.
Perfect. Mark, this has been a great pleasure. I really feel that the episode is packed with really actionable points for people who want to communicate and even who want to go into policy, very practical ones. So I want to thank you very much for having accepted my invitation, for being here on Papa PhD. All of these links that Mark has mentioned will be in the show notes. So if you can go back 10 seconds and take note. If you don't want to, it's fine. It's going to be in the show notes of the episode. So again, Mark, thank you so much for having been here today. It's been a great pleasure, and I think the listeners will have a treat listening to our interview.
Well, thanks, David. I really appreciate you having me on the show. I love what you're doing. I love the show. And it was really an honor to be with you and to have a chance to talk with you and to engage.
And that's it for this episode of Papa PhD. If you have questions or comments related to this interview, reach out to me or to Mark on Twitter or on LinkedIn. You'll find the links in the episode show notes. If this is the first episode you listen to, do go to papaphd.com/start and explore the Papa PhD starter packs. I'm sure you'll find inspiration in many of the stories shared and strategies to apply in your academic and professional journey. And if you do like the show, share your favorite episode with a friend. Word of mouth is the best way you can help indie podcasters like me reach a wider audience. Thank you for being a faithful listener. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Papa PhD podcast. Head over to papaphd.com for show notes and for more food for thought about non-academic postgrad careers. I'll always be happy to share inspiring stories, new ideas, and useful resources here on the podcast. So make sure you subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts to always keep up with the discussion and to hear from our latest guests.